The rifle that killed Osama bin Laden was not the M4 carbine that the United States Army officially issued to the operators who carried it, and the 18-year gap between when Heckler & Koch built the HK416 in 2004 and when the Army officially adopted a variant of it in 2022 contains the entire story of what relentless actually means when it is applied to a rifle rather than to a person. The HK416 solved one problem. One specific, documented, consistently reported problem that the M4 carbine had been producing in operational reports since the first weeks of the Afghanistan campaign. The direct impingement gas system that deposited carbon fouling directly into the bolt carrier group with every shot and made the rifle progressively less reliable as the round count climbed in sustained combat. Delta Force operators began carrying the HK416 unofficially within months of its availability in 2004 because they understood what that one problem cost in the environments they operated in. The Army declined to adopt it. SEAL Team 6 carried it to the most consequential raid in the history of American Special Operations. The Army still declined to adopt it. It was used on classified operations for a decade. The Army continued declining. Then, in 2022, the Army adopted a variant as the M38 designated marksman rifle, and the HK416 entered official service 18 years after Delta Force operators had started carrying it to do the work that official issue weapons were not always doing. The question that hangs over that 18-year timeline is not whether the HK416 was better than the M4. The evidence answers that question directly and without ambiguity. The question is what it reveals about the relationship between operational reality and institutional momentum when the people who carry the guns conclude something different from the institution that issues them. Delta Force concluded it in 2004 and bought the HK416 with their own unit funds. SEAL Team 6 concluded it in the years that followed and acquired the same rifle. The United States Army spent 18 years reaching the same conclusion that two of its most operationally experienced units had reached in the first year of the rifle's existence. That gap is the story. The bolt carrier group that accumulated carbon fouling in the M4's direct impingement system while the Army deliberated is the motif that connects every section of what follows. Heckler & Koch was not the company anyone would have predicted would produce the most consequential improvement to the standard American military rifle of the 21st century and the specific history of HK's relationship with the American military establishment makes that statement worth examining before the HK416 story begins, because the context transforms what the rifle's 18-year unofficial service record reveals about institutional behavior. The company had been founded in 1949 in Oberndorf am Neckar in Baden-Württemberg, West Germany, by Edmund Heckler, Theodor Koch, and Alex Seidel, engineers from the former Mauser factory, building a precision engineering company in the rubble of post-war Germany's industrial reconstruction. Their first firearms contract came from the West German Bundeswehr, which needed a new service rifle for the newly reconstituted German military. HK won that contract with the G3, a roller-delayed blowback rifle derived from the Spanish Setme design, and delivered a weapon that became the standard service rifle of West Germany and was subsequently adopted by more than 50 nations. The G3 was not the rifle that defined HK's relationship with American Special Operations, but it was the engineering credential that established HK as a manufacturer capable of producing weapons at military specification and military scale. The MP5 submachine gun that emerged from the G3's roller-delayed blowback system in the 1960s was the weapon that put HK in the hands of American Special Operations forces in ways that the G3 had not. The MP5 became the standard suppressed submachine gun of American counterterrorism and special operations units through the 1980s and 1990s, the weapon carried by the Delta Force operators who attempted the 5 Canatarakan rescue mission in Iran in 1980, the weapon that appeared in the hands of GSG-9 at Mogadishu in 1977, the weapon that the SAS carried into the Iranian embassy in 1980, and that became, through that operation's live television broadcast, the visual shorthand for professional counterterrorism competence for an entire generation. The MP5's presence in the American Special Operations community was not the result of a formal Army procurement program. It was the result of units who needed a reliable suppressed weapon in 9mm and found that HK's roller-delayed system delivered it more consistently than available alternatives. The pattern that produced the HK416's 18-year unofficial service period was not new. It was the same pattern by which the MP5 had entered the American Special Operations inventory decades earlier, through operators choosing what worked rather than through institutions adopting what was approved. The PSG-1 designated marksman rifle and the HK-21 machine gun extended HK's footprint in American Special Operations through the same mechanism, unit procurement. of specific weapons for specific operational requirements that the standard Army issue chain was not satisfying. By the early 2000s, HK was a known quantity in the American Special Operations community in a way that was independent of the Army's official procurement relationship with the company. The people who carried weapons professionally and evaluated them against the conditions that actually mattered had been finding HK's designs reliable for 2 decades. When Delta Force's R&D NCO, Staff Sergeant Larry Vickers, approached HK with a specific engineering problem in the early 2000s, he was not approaching an unfamiliar manufacturer hoping for a sympathetic response. He was approaching a company whose products his unit had been using and trusting for 20 years. The specific problem Vickers brought to HK was the one that had been accumulating in Delta Force's operational experience since the unit began sustained combat operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. The M4 carbine's direct impingement gas system, the stoner mechanism that routed hot propellant gas through a tube directly into the bolt carrier group, deposited carbon and combustion residue on the bolt carrier group with every shot. Under the firing rates that a standard infantry battalion sustained in training and occasional combat, this fouling accumulated slowly enough that standard cleaning schedules managed it without operational consequence. Delta Force was not a standard infantry battalion. The operators who made up 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta were putting thousands of rounds through their weapons every month in training cycles designed to maintain the shooting proficiency that direct action raids demanded, and in operational deployments that were more frequent and more intense than any comparable military formation. At Tier 1 firing rates, the bolt carrier group of a direct impingement M4 fouled at rates that no field cleaning schedule could fully address between operational cycles. The rifle that went out on a raid was not always the rifle that had been freshly cleaned before departure. It was the rifle that had accumulated the fouling of the previous training session and the previous deployment and whatever. Cleaning time had been available in between. Under those conditions, the bolt carrier group's carbon accumulation was not a theoretical maintenance concern. It was an operational variable that reduced reliability precisely when reliability mattered most. The documented M4 failures in Tier 1 operations are not fully in the public record because the operations themselves are classified, and the after-action reports that would quantify the malfunction rates are not publicly available. What is in the public record, through congressional testimony and published accounts from operators who spoke to journalists in the mid-2000s, is that M4 reliability under sustained high-volume fire was the primary small arms concern in the special operations community by the time Vickers approached HK. A Marine Corps Times article published in February 2007 quoted sources stating explicitly that special operations forces including Tier 1 units such as the Army's Delta Force and the Navy's SEAL Development Group had used their own funds to purchase the HK416 because it used a gas piston operating system less susceptible to failure than the standard direct impingement M4. The phrase "use their own funds" is the operative detail units spending their own procurement money on weapons that the Army was not providing is an institutional signal of significant operational urgency. Vickers's ask was technically constrained in ways that made the solution harder to produce, but the result more useful. Delta Force needed the bolt carrier group to stay clean. They needed the improvement to work with the existing M4 lower receiver, the serialized, registered component that was the legally tracked part of the weapon system, because replacing the lower receiver meant new paperwork, new armorer certification, and a logistical complexity the request was designed to avoid. They needed compatibility with standard M4 magazines, standard M4 ammunition, and standard M4 accessories. One problem, one set of constraints, one ask from a unit that had been evaluating what their weapons actually did in the field, rather than what the procurement documentation said they should do. HK's answer was the short-stroke gas piston system derived from the G36 assault rifle, the Bundeswehr's standard service rifle, itself derived partly from the AR-18 design that Armalite had produced as an alternative to Stoner's original AR-15. The G36's gas system tapped propellant gas from the barrel, but rather than routing it directly into the bolt carrier group through a tube, it used the gas pressure to drive a piston rearward. The piston transferred its energy mechanically to an operating rod that drove the bolt carrier group rearward, cycling the action. The propellant gas itself never entered the receiver. No gas in the receiver meant no carbon fouling on the bolt carrier group. The bolt carrier group of a piston-driven system, after 6,000 rounds of sustained fire, looked fundamentally different from the bolt carrier group of a direct impingement, M4, after the same round count cleaner, cooler, and mechanically more consistent across the full range of operating temperatures and fouling conditions that sustained combat produced. Adapting this piston system to work with the M4's lower receiver required engineering work that HK performed in collaboration with Delta Force through 2003 and 2004 testing at Yuma Proving Ground in Arizona. The project was originally called the HK4, a name that Colt Defense successfully challenged as a trademark infringement, producing the alternative designation HK416. The prototype that emerged used the M4's standard lower receiver, standard bolt dimensions, and standard magazine. The upper receiver was new machined by HK to accommodate the piston operating rod and the low-profile gas block. The barrel was cold hammer forged rather than button rifled, producing measurably longer barrel life. An operator who already carried an M4 lower receiver could convert to the HK416 by replacing only the upper receiver, retaining the serialized lower, the magazines, and the accessories already acquired. Delta Force replaced its M4S with the HK416 in 2004, not through a formal Army procurement channel, not through a SOCOM acquisition program, through unit funds. The specific financial authority that Tier 1 Special Operations units possess to acquire equipment outside the standard procurement chain when they identify an operational requirement the standard chain has not addressed. The Army did not issue Delta Force, the HK416. Delta Force bought it with their own money because they had concluded that the bolt carrier group accumulating carbon fouling in the M4's direct impingement system was a problem. The institution was not moving fast enough to solve. In 2006, JSOC Joint Special Operations Command began fielding the HK416 more broadly as its primary carbine across Tier 1 units, Delta Force, SEAL Team 6. The Asymmetric Warfare Group. The specific funding mechanism remained unit purchases rather than Army procurement. The specific justification remained identical. The piston system significantly reduced malfunctions while increasing parts life across the sustained, high-volume firing conditions that Tier 1 units imposed on their weapons. The Army's position during this period was not irrational, and the hybrid architecture of this channel requires stating that fairly. The M4 carbine represented an enormous institutional investment not just in the rifles themselves, which numbered in the hundreds of thousands across the force, but in the spare parts inventories, the armorer training programs, the technical manuals, the accessories development, the simulator systems, and the accumulated operational knowledge built around the M4 platform through 15 years of service. The SOP Mod Block 2 program, heavier barrels, improved buffers, enhanced trigger packages, was the Army's preferred answer to the documented M4 reliability problems. Incremental improvement of the existing platform rather than structural replacement of its most fundamental mechanical design. The Army's assessment was that the symptom management the Block 2 program provided was sufficient to justify not replacing the architecture producing the symptoms. That assessment was based on a distribution of usage conditions across the full force. Most soldiers fired their M4 infrequently, maintained it on standard schedules, and never approached the round counts that degraded the direct impingement system's performance to the point of operational consequence. Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 were not a representative sample of the force's usage conditions. They were the extreme end. The Army's aggregate assessment, weighted toward the distribution of usage across the full force, did not capture with the same urgency what the units at the extreme end were experiencing and spending their own money to address. The individual carbine competition that the Army launched in the early 2010s to potentially replace the M4, a competition in which the HK416 participated alongside multiple other piston-driven and conventional. Competitors ran from approximately 2010 to 2013 before the Army canceled it, without selecting a replacement. The stated reason was that none of the competing rifles demonstrated sufficient performance improvement over the M4A1 to justify the cost of a full platform replacement. The HK416 had participated. The Army had evaluated it formally, in a structured competition, against the same criteria it had been applying to M4 reliability concerns for a decade. The Army's conclusion was that the improvement was not sufficient to justify the transition cost. The Marine Corps, operating in the same environment with access to the same rifles, had reached a different conclusion using the M27 program. Two American military services, the same evidence, the same operational experience, two different institutional conclusions about what the evidence required them to do. Except that on the 2nd of May 2011, the unofficial service record of the HK416 had been recorded in the most consequential way possible, in a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. Operation Neptune Spear was not a raid that the SEAL Team 6 operators who planned it approached with uncertainty about their weapons. By the time the helicopters lifted off from Jalalabad in the early hours of May 2nd, the Naval Special Warfare Development Group had been carrying HK416S for years in training, in operational deployments across Afghanistan and Iraq, in the classified direct action missions that the public record does not capture in individual detail, but that the general pattern of JSOC activity through the mid-2000s makes clear were numerous and sustained. The rifles the SEALs carried into that compound in Abbottabad were not new to their hands. They were the rifles those operators had been using, qualifying with, trusting, and maintaining for long enough that the muscle memory of the HK416's specific mechanical characteristics was built into how they operated. The suppressed HK416 in the hands of a DevGru operator in 2011 was not an improvised solution to an immediate need. It was the result of a decade of unit-level procurement decisions, training, investment, and operational use that had produced exactly the confidence that a mission of that consequence required in the weapon that would be used to conduct it. The accounts of what happened on the third floor that night are contested in their specific details. Former SEAL Robert O'Neill, who has publicly identified himself as the shooter, states that he fired the shots that killed Osama bin Laden. Former SEAL Matt Bissonnette, in his book No Easy Day, published under the pseudonym Mark Owen, describes a sequence in which a point man fired first, and O'Neill's shots followed into a body already falling. The specific sequence of events and the specific identity of which rounds were lethal has been the subject of considerable inter-SEAL dispute that this channel has no basis to adjudicate. What is not disputed in any credible account is the platform. The rifle carried by the SEALs who entered that compound, confirmed across multiple independent accounts from participants and corroborated by every credible journalistic reconstruction of the operation, was the HK416. The Department of Defense has never officially confirmed the specific weapons used in Operation Neptune Spear. The accounts that establish the HK416 come from participants who chose to speak publicly. Both O'Neill and Bissonnette faced criticism from fellow SEALs for violating the community's traditional silence, and the record on the specific sequence of events is contested between named individuals in ways that the weapon's identification is not. A rifle that the Army had been declining to adopt for 7 years had just been used by the Navy's Tier 1 Special Operations Unit to conduct the most significant direct-action mission in the history of American counterterrorism. The Army was aware. The Army was still not buying. The French armed forces were buying. Norway had adopted the HK416 as its standard service rifle in 2008. The entire Norwegian armed forces, not a special operations unit or a specific program, but the country's standard-issue infantry weapon. The Norwegian adoption was driven by the same documented reliability advantages that Delta Force had identified in 2004, applied to the conclusion that no Norwegian infantry soldier should carry an inferior direct impingement system when a superior piston-driven alternative was available at comparable cost. France selected the HK416F in 2016 to replace the FAMAS, the service rifle that had been the standard weapon of French infantry since the 1970s, with a contract for 93,080. Rifles in short and standard barrel configurations, some compatible with Felon integrated soldier equipment attachments. The French procurement decision was made in the same year that the U.S. Army's individual carbine competition had already been canceled for 2 years, without producing a replacement, a timeline that places the French decision, the American non-decision, in direct and illuminating contrast. The German Army, which had been using HK's G36 as its standard service rifle, began a transition to the HK416 to replace the G36, after reports that the G36 suffered accuracy degradation under sustained fire and high ambient temperatures. HK was now providing the replacement for its own previous standard service rifle, an assessment of the G36's sustained fire performance that was produced by the same kind of operational experience, in the same kind of demanding conditions that had produced the HK416's documented advantages over the M4. The Marine Corps had moved where the Army had not, using the M27 Infantry Automatic Rifle Program as the mechanism. The M27, selected in 2011 to replace the M249 Squad Automatic Weapon at the Squad Automatic Rifleman position, performed well enough in Marine Corps hands that in 2018, the USMC extended its use to standard infantry riflemen across Marine infantry battalions. The Marines were, in effect, replacing their M4S with HK416 variants through the back door of an automatic weapon replacement program. The rifle that the Army's individual carbine competition had evaluated and declined to adopt as an M4 replacement was becoming the standard infantry rifle of the United States Marine Corps through a different program with a different name and a different stated purpose, but the same piston-driven mechanical solution to the same direct impingement problem that Delta Force had identified in 2004. In popular culture, the HK416 has become the visual shorthand for a specific kind of sophisticated operational lethality that the post-Abbottabad era associates with the Tier 1 community. Call of Duty fielded it. Battlefield fielded it. Zero Dark 30, the film that dramatized Operation Neptune Spear, placed HK416S in the hands of the SEAL team that entered the compound not as a prop department decision, but as a continuity choice based on what the operators actually carried. The visual of the rifle that killed bin Laden, acknowledged in popular culture before it was acknowledged by the Department of Defense, made the HK416 the rifle that a generation of civilians associated with the most effective special operations forces on Earth, independently of whether the Army's procurement system had caught up with that operational reality. The civilian HK416 variant, commercially available at a premium price that reflected both the manufacturing quality and the cultural association the Abbottabad mission had created, sold consistently through the years. Following 2011 to an enthusiast market that had processed the same information the Army had processed and reached the same conclusion that the Marine Corps had reached. The Army's formal M38 designation came in 2022, the HK416-based squad-designated marksman rifle, adopted not through a conversion from the individual carbine competition's conclusions, but through the body of evidence that the Marine Corps M27's operational record had generated, and that the Army's own internal evaluations had been generating across 18 years of watching Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, and eventually the Marine Corps use the platform. It was acknowledgement. It was not the sweeping vindication that the rifle's 18-year unofficial service record might have suggested was approaching. The M4A1 remained the Army's standard issue rifle. The HK416 entered official Army inventory in a specific role for a specific mission through a procurement process that was narrower in scope than the full-service rifle replacement that the bolt carrier group evidence had been arguing for since 2004. It started as a bolt carrier group, the specific component that Delta Force's R&D NCO identified as the point of failure in the M4's direct impingement system, and that HK's piston operating rod kept clean across. The round counts that Tier 1 units sustained, in the training facilities at Yuma and the compounds of Afghanistan, and the classified targets of a decade of JSOC operations. It was bought with unit funds because the institution issuing official weapons was not moving at the speed the operational reality required. It was carried to Abbottabad while the Army that employed the operators carrying it was still running an individual carbine competition that it would cancel without selecting a winner. It was adopted by the Marine Corps through a squad automatic weapon program that became a service rifle replacement through the weight of its own operational evidence. It became the standard service rifle of Norway in 2008, France in 2017, and is replacing the G36 in Germany. And 18 years after Delta Force bought it with their own money to solve a problem the Army had not solved, the Army designated a variant as the M38. The HK416 is not relentless because it is the most powerful rifle in service, or the most technologically sophisticated weapon the 21st century has produced. It is relentless because one specific engineering decision, routing the gas through a piston and operating rod instead of through a tube into the bolt carrier group, proved itself in the hands of the people who could choose. What they carried before the people who issued weapons officially acknowledged what those choices meant, and then spent 18 years proving the same thing in every operational environment that mattered until the institution that had been looking away ran out of reasons to keep looking. If you enjoyed this, hit like, subscribe, and check out the next video right here.